Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. As always, I want to remind you to grab a notepad, grab a pen, because I want you to make a commitment that you'll jot down some notes, jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. That's what this is all about. Our discussions are meant to stimulate action, implementation, driving your business forward. Now, recently, I posted a video in which I contemplated a couple of common idioms. We looked at the concept of ignorance is bliss, and that not being such a good thing in the context of business. And we also framed that from the perspective of the idiom that everyone's perception is his reality. And we talked about making sure that your reality is congruent with the facts. But when I had that reflection and I looked back on it, I thought, there's another idiom that really resonates with me, and I want to discuss that with you. And it was probably just a continuation of that same topic, and that is that you don't know what you don't know. Have you heard people talk about this or say this? You don't know what you don't know. It seems obvious, like, duh, yeah, of course I don't know what I don't know, because if I knew, I would know it. But that's not really necessarily the case. So I want to talk about that. I've heard this described differently. Have you heard of the Dunning Kruger Effect? There are a couple of psychologists formerly of Cornell who describe this phenomenon. They call it the Dunning Kruger Effect, which is, it's described that the less you know about something, the more you sort of self-evaluate your competence. You think you know more than you do. And the more you learn about something, conversely, the more you realize how much, very much more there is to know. And that concept really is a good way to think about the idea behind you don't know what you don't know. Another one, I guess when I was first getting involved in sales, the great sales trainer Tom Hopkins described this idea of the various levels of competency. And the first level he described is unconscious incompetence. And then you graduate eventually to conscious incompetence. And then you graduate from there to conscious competence. And finally to unconscious competence. Did I say that correctly? Unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and the fourth and the highest level is unconscious competence. And this would be related to this subject if we talk about unconscious incompetence. So let's just describe the four levels just briefly here. So unconscious incompetence, which we're talking about today, you don't know what you don't know, is this idea that you're really incompetent at something, but you don't really realize how incompetent you are because you're not sure what it is that you're doing wrong. You don't even know enough about it, or you're not familiar with the task, or you're not skilled in the task enough, or in the whatever behavior, that you don't even realize what it is you're doing wrong and why it is that you're incompetent. But then if you continue with that and you learn more about it and you practice and you get more experience, you become conscious incompetent. Now you're still incompetent, but now you realize that you're incompetent. You have that self-awareness and you start to identify some ways in which you're incompetent, some areas that you need some help on. And then of course you can start to focus on those areas. And again, with more experience and practice, you become competent, but now you are consciously competent, the third level, the penultimate level of competence. So you're competent and you're kind of having to focus on it. You know that you're competent and you know why you're competent, and you have to consciously think of those things which make you competent as you're practicing your skill, whatever your behavior is. And then the fourth and the highest level of competence becomes that unconscious competence, where you're very competent, but it's like second nature. You don't even have to think about it. And in fact, you may not be a very skilled teacher at this level because you can't even identify for people what it is that you're doing that's so good. You just know by second nature, you're just doing things, you're acting almost on instinct, and everything is working out well. Somebody observes you and they go, well, how come you did that so successfully and I did the same thing and I don't have the same results? And they may look back and say, I don't know, I can't explain it, because you're unconscious of all the little subtleties, nuances that you've incorporated into that skill. Now, today we're talking about you don't know what you don't know. You are part of the low level of the Dunning Kruger Effect. You probably would evaluate yourself higher than what would be substantiated in terms of your understanding and knowledge of a topic. You are an unconscious incompetent. And why I'm bringing this up is along the same lines of those two other things, that ignorance is bliss. I've had occasion to work with a number of businesses, and it's come up frequently. It's not infrequent, it's not uncommon to notice that people don't know what they don't know. I've had people share with us where they need the most help, and they may say, yeah, this particular area I'm not very good at, and I really could use your assistance. But we know from Dunning-Kruger that the very fact that they are identifying their inability to do it on their own speaks to that they've got a somewhat of a greater level of understanding than some other areas, or maybe some other people who wouldn't even identify that they need assistance with that. So they're advancing to the conscious incompetent. But at the same time, they say that's the only area I need help, or these other areas I'm doing fine in. It may very well be that those are the areas they need the most help with, because that's where they're unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know. So I want to think about that. I think about this in my own business, and I was really, as I was contemplating this, thinking to myself, well, what advice would I give to people? And how do you deal with this? And it was a bit of a stumper for me, because I was like, well, you don't know what you don't know. I know you might say, and we could apply this to any sort of topic. We could be talking about economics, we could be talking about business, we could be talking about theology or engineering or whatever. And you can appreciate, it could even be a sport, any sort of topic whatsoever. The less experience you have with it, the less knowledge you have, the more unaware of your how much more there is to learn. And then as you start to learn things, you can put yourself in that position and think back to the times when you've been learning more and more about something. You go, oh wow, there's a lot more here than I realized. And you start to climb those levels of competency, and you start to experience what Dunning and Kruger, the Dunning Kruger Effect, what they described in their psychological observations and study. So it doesn't matter what topic we're talking about here. Now, I'm not saying you need to know everything. You don't have to have special knowledge in everything and specialized understanding of every single thing as it relates to business, even your business. You might say to me, well, what happened to keeping it simple, Michael? I thought you endorsed that. Absolutely, I would endorse, whenever possible, keep it as simple as possible. We're not saying that you have to know everything, but you have to have this self-awareness of those things that you do not know. You don't have to know them. That is, you don't have to be competent in practicing those skills that they relate to, but you have to at least be aware that that is an area that you probably need to know more about if you were going to have to practice that, or if it was critical element in your business. So I want you to think about this the way I did. I want you to just sort of pause and think, well, what areas of the business might I think? Maybe we go back to that ignorance is bliss. Maybe I'm blissfully ignorant about this. I don't know what I don't know. And my reality is my own perception that I'm just doing fine, but that might not be actually what's going on when you measure the data. So as I thought about this and reflected on it, well, what advice would you give? What would you give your own management team? What advice would you give yourself? How do you deal with this? And this is all I could come up with. Maybe you should, in your reflections, think about how you have dealt with this, or if you haven't dealt with it, how will you deal with it? Because it's a bit of a scary concept to realize that you don't know what you don't know, and that you're probably evaluating your knowledge of certain things much higher than they really are. And the degree to which you rate yourself lower is probably an indication that you're on the right track. You're getting better. You're making advancements. That sort of paradox makes you go, wow, okay, so therefore if I'm resting comfortably in my knowledge of something or an area of my business that I think is going really well, maybe I'm deceiving myself. I may not know. I do not know what I don't know. So how do I deal with that? Here's what I came up with. You got to always be learning. You got to continuously try to learn. So, that's one of the purposes of these videos. I say at the beginning of these videos a lot of times that some of this stuff may be obvious to you, but still we go through it because we need to be reminded of things that maybe they are intuitive and they seem obvious, but we're not practicing. That's one of the things. I also talk about the benefit of review. But every now and then you might hear something and go, oh, okay, well, out of 15 minutes, there was only 1 minute there where there was a concept I hadn't really thought of. And that is an area I could explore a little bit more. Always be learning, and hopefully by looking at videos like this one and other sources of information, you'll come across stuff and you'll start to realize, oh, there is some more information there. What I like to do, and I'd advise you to do this as well as you're engaging in continual learning and self-improvement, is I consider all sorts of sources. You don't want to get caught up in this notion of confirmation bias, where you're so dedicated to an ideology or this particular way of thinking, a conclusion you've made, a paradigm that you operate under, that you eschew everything else. You just reject all other concepts. Instead, what you should do is introduce contrarian notions and people who speak to you, or sources of information that might present the opposite of your current viewpoint, and see if there's any merit there. What I like to do is include a variety of sources and pundits and experts who are speaking on a particular topic. Let's say the example of economics, and I hear what they have to say. And where there's overlap, often there are people who disagree. They're sort of the polar opposite opinion on most things, but some things they do agree on. And where I see that common area among a number of people, I have a greater level of confidence that that's probably an area that is accurate, that they're describing. They disagree on everything else, but they all agree on this one thing. And I start to latch onto those things as closer to any sort of a law or principle that I can put as an axiom and a heuristic that I can lean on foundationally in my business. And then when there is a lot of dissension and a lot of disagreement on another thing, I keep looking, and then I look to, what credibility, why I might assign greater credibility to one source than another, why one expert maybe seems more credible to me than another, and that kind of thing. But the idea is you want to embrace both of the sources. I've given an example before. I'm a big proponent of Adam Smith and how he described economics and capitalism and acting in your own self-interest, and that benefits everyone. However, I have spent no small measure of time focused on Karl Marx and Engels and what they reported in terms of socialism and Das Kapital and these types of things. You want to look at that before you reject a notion completely. You want to start to familiarize yourself with it more and more. And you should do this in all areas. And so that's, I think, what the advice I would give you is always be learning. And while you're always learning, make sure you're considering polar opposite sources, contrary sources of information, and see what resonates with you, what seems to be more accurate in your experiences, and how might it be more relevant in your business. So that's the main way I think you can counteract this notion of you don't know what you don't know. And the second one is measurement. Test your facts against your measurements. What does the data say versus what are your hypotheses? So if you believe one particular thing and you don't know what you don't know, line it up against the data. Does it reconcile? If it doesn't, don't fall on your confirmation bias and say, well, the data's got to be wrong. Don't assume that. No, the data may be wrong, and there's nothing wrong with going back and retesting and looking for precision in your measurements, but your paradigm could be wrong, could be flawed. You may have an improper mental map of how you're viewing things. And this is one of the ways to do it, is measurement, measurement, measurement. So do you have measurements? I harp on that continually because it's so important in your business. That which is measured improves to the degree that you actually spend some time looking at those measurements, analyzing them, and responding to them. So that was a continuation of the concept of ignorance is bliss, and everyone's perception is his own reality, and you don't know what you don't know, unconscious incompetence, Dunning Kruger Effect, all those kinds of things. I want you to reflect on this and think about, are there areas in your business, like I've observed with many of the businesses I've interacted with, where you're thinking, no, everything's just fine over there. And by the way, without being overly critical of any one business that I'm referencing here, because it's true in my business as well, these people really don't know what they don't know. I may have engaged with the organization and observed some things and go, wow, I'm pretty sure that the leader of this organization, this manager, this business owner does not realize how poorly he's performing in this particular area, or how the quality assurance is really sporadic and not very consistent whatsoever. You probably have areas like this in your business. It's almost assuredly, we all do, because you don't know what you don't know. You've got to continually be learning, and then when you learn something new, you go, well, I should look at that in my business and test this and see what the data supports and be measuring. I think that's where I'm going to leave it today, and I hope you got something out of this. Leave a comment and let me know if you'd like to discuss other idioms. Are there other things that are helpful for you to use as axioms in your business, as friendly reminders to yourself of how you can be perpetually refining and continually improving? Do you want to push back on what I'm saying? Do you disagree with this? Do you have a different way that the Dunning Kruger Effect has materialized and manifest in your business? Are you, where would you rank yourself? Would you say that you're a unconscious competent in your industry, or are you a conscious competent? Most likely, that's where most of us fall. Or are you unconscious competent, where everything just happens just sort of instinctively, habitually, you just know what you're doing, you're a grand master at it? Leave a comment that we can all learn from, because we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.